Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about entrepreneurship in IT. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, I find that in the software industry there are areas of job opportunities, for example web development. But these areas do not necessarily present such a great entrepreneurial opportunity, for example, web development, freelancing at small agencies, and so forth. What areas of entrepreneurial opportunity would you highlight in our industry? So I'm not 100% sure what you mean by this, so I kind of just went with what I suspect that you mean, which is basically what type of businesses can you, in a lucrative manner, go into. If I'm assuming now that you're not just talking about getting a job, because if you don't feel that web development as a freelancer or a small agency is a good opportunity, well, then the only other thing, if you're going to be a standard unit of a software developer, is large scale projects, which is, well, what most people want to be involved in unless you go into startups. It's kind of funny because I don't, most software developers, like professional software developers, they don't count freelancing and small agency work as professional work. It is professional work in a sense, but the level that you do that at is usually a lot lower than in the larger corporations or in many startups and so forth. That's not always true, but it's usually the case that hiring someone who is a freelancer or who has primarily worked in small agencies for large-scale systems, it's actually very rare that you find anybody who's worth anything, because they simply do not it's similar to, like, if working at a small agency, now depending on the nature of the problems of course, but on average working at that scale, the difference between that and doing stuff at the higher levels is like being a professional athlete versus being someone who is trying to get into the majors. So it's just something that I should mention to you. So if your idea is that you don't think that web development as a freelancer or as an agency is the thing that gives you like the money, it's probably because you're barking up the wrong tree. That is what we call usually the low end of IT. Where you can basically, if you work at the right agency in the right region, you can get away with just knowing some basic HTML and CSS. That's not possible if you're going to work at, say, one of the FAANG companies, or if you're going to or it doesn't even have to be a FAANG company. If you want to do any type of professional grade software development, that's not going to cut it. But that's why that's what WordPress and like all of these sorts of sites, that's usually where you find the need for those sorts of skills. And it's by coincidence one of the reasons why PHP is still such a big player. But if we're going to be more broad and we're going to talk about, I don't know, like business ideas or things like that, I would go and say this. This is an enormous question. Like, for me to give you a rundown of all the things that could be a useful investment for you if you want to disrupt an industry or something like that, that's just enormous. But I can tell you this, that based on my experience, IT is about three things: convenience, efficiency, and insight. These are the three things that every single company in every single IT department and like what everybody's building in some way, because a digital solution, it has to bring one of these three things, ideally all of them at the same time, of course. Insight is usually the hardest one. Efficiency and convenience are usually easier. Simply put, because most of what we do as software developers is that we are converting a process that is either impossible to do, or it's impractical, like a web shop or creating something like that. We're taking something that is very costly in the real world, or it takes a lot of time, or is inconvenient in some fashion, and as in this case it's web development, right? So we put that on the web and we create a digital solution that makes that much smoother and simpler. That's why Amazon is eating the whole planet, because they are one of the biggest players or first players who actually realized that, hey, you know what? People don't actually care about the store. They care about the price, delivery, and the convenience of purchase. like all of this stuff, like the how many products do you have in your portfolio, this sort of stuff. It's the same mistake that Blockbuster made, where you made an assumption, or that the company made an assumption. People want to go and rent movies or something like that, and I always tell people, never ever 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 think that you know what the customer wants. Always bet on convenience and efficiency and insight. In every I'll go as far to say that the most powerful force on the planet is not love, it is laziness. People are lazy. They're going to be lazy when they to their death if you let them. And if you tap into that, which is usually very easy as a software developer, there is money to be made. So it's actually not that complicated to make money as a software developer, even if you started your own company. The problem is usually to find a problem that is worth solving, that people are willing to pay for. And this is where the entrepreneurial part comes into the whole thing, because the coding is usually very easy. It's actually funny because it's extremely rare that to get rich as a software developer or as an entrepreneur in IT, that you actually need to have really high coding skills, because most of the systems that are making millions and millions, maybe not at the Google's level, but there are so many systems that are raking in the cash, and they are shit if we talk from the technical perspective, because most of the problems that people are solving are not actually, they don't really require a sophisticated solution. It's actually very easy. I mean, most companies who are paying for software services are all buying the same sort of thing. It's just they have different types of data. There's a CRM or like some content management system, CMS or whatever, right? Or a website or something like that. You're basically just storing and moving around data for the most part. It's very rare that you're doing something more advanced than that. And say big corporations, that's why there's so many consultancies, because there's usually quite a lot of corporations. Their systems are shit usually. I can speak from first-hand experience, and they have more money than you can possibly imagine. So in many cases they will pay, absurd amounts of money to people who are so subpar in terms of skill and efficiency, and they build systems that are complete crap. And this is one of those vendor locking things that companies are afraid of, because you hire this consultancy where they set up something for you that is like completely worthless, but it improves in one of these areas a little bit, and now you're stuck with them. So the consultancies basically have a cozy income now from this big corporation as long as they maintain this shit system. So there's actually a lot of areas in the big corporations and a lot of money where as I said, they usually have a simple problem to solve. The hard part is to sell your services, to get your foot in the door. And for say small businesses, it's usually not that feasible for you to make like good entrepreneurial, like unless you're starting your own consultancy or something like that. It's really hard with small businesses because they don't have a lot of money, and they all have very, very different problems usually, because small businesses, like, they run in so many different ways. Big corporations usually have the same problem, almost all of them. The big earner, if I'm going to give you like the hottest tip that I know of, which is probably, this is what I would do if I were to start my own IT firm or something like that. The big earner is usually to create an industry platform of some sort. What I mean by that is, a very extreme example would be Photoshop. That is an industry platform. It basically runs all of that entire industry, or like it's the main player in that space. It's the same thing that most of the companies are doing. It's the same thing that Google is doing, Microsoft is doing, like at different scales, of course. The thing that I think many people are missing is that there's actually a lot of companies and industries where the IT revolution hasn't really reached there. I have friends who make millions in small companies because they created like everything from small accounting solutions for certain industries, or like platforms for airplane companies or things like that. They focus in on a niche, something that is like for an industry that has a lot of money, and then they find an error-prone or a process that can be simplified in some fashion, and then they provide a solution to that. And if there's a big player or a bigger fish in that area who doesn't like what they're doing, they buy them. and then they cash out like bandits. So what I want you to take away from this is that when it comes to entrepreneurial things in IT, it's actually not that difficult to find opportunities. Always, in my experience, bet on convenience, efficiency, and insight, business insight, and things like that. These three things are the main things that matter to practically everybody who's buying digital systems. Big corporations are usually the best bet. They have the most amount of money and the simplest problems, where you can basically invest all your time into solving a problem for a big corporation. And I mean, if you land that contract, that's going to be a lot of money for you, and you can basically create an entire company around just supporting one of these gigantic corporations if you wanted to. If you want to hear my opinion on like the big earner, the thing that is going to make you the most amount of money, it's about industry platforms. Create a solution that can scale to multiple different companies and solves a problem that is common to all of them. The endless cycle there is that there's a lot of people doing that, and their systems usually turn out really crappily. Like the user experience becomes horrible because, of course, the more companies that you're going to fit into your portfolio, companies who can use the system, the more advanced the system. And the more advanced the system, the harder it is usually to use. And then you're going to be the big fish who's going to get disrupted by the next little startup that comes and simplifies something, and you're going to either have to buy them or figure out some way of making your product sustainable. Have a great day.